I know how this sounds. I know you're probably thinking it's the kind of story that only happens in movies, or in one of those books you find at the airport with a faded cover and a price sticker still stuck to the spine. But I need you to understand something before I tell you any of it. Every single word is true. I was there. I lived it. And if you give me a little of your time, you'll understand why that freezing November night at a Greyhound station in rural Tennessee ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me in 63 years of living. My name is James Calloway, and until that night, I thought I understood what it meant to hit rock bottom. I spent 35 years behind the wheel of a semi-truck, coast to coast, border to border. I've driven through ice storms in Montana, flash floods in Louisiana, and summer heat in the Mojave that turned the highway into something that shimmered like a mirage. My back paid for every one of those miles. My knees paid for every loading dock I ever climbed down from. My marriage paid for every night I spent sleeping in the cab instead of next to my wife. Carol, God rest her soul. Carol passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. We had 11 months from diagnosis to the end, and I spent every one of those months by her side, which meant the last year of my trucking career was half a career. I don't regret a single day of it. What I do regret is what came after. When you lose your wife of 32 years, the grief doesn't arrive all at once. It staggers in, room by room, like a slow flood. First, it's the bedroom, then the kitchen, because you keep reaching for 2 coffee mugs out of habit. Then it's the whole house. And the house that used to feel too small for 2 people starts feeling like an ocean you're drowning in alone. My son, Marcus, was the one who suggested I sell it. He called me on a Tuesday evening, and his voice had that careful, measured tone I had learned to recognize over the years. The tone that meant he had rehearsed what he was going to say. Dad, his wife Dana and I have been talking. The house is too big for one person. You're paying property taxes, utilities, maintenance, all of it on a fixed income. It doesn't make financial sense. He paused. We want you to move in with us. We have the spare room. The kids would love having their grandfather around. I want to be honest with you about something. Part of me knew, even then, standing in Carol's kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, that something about it felt off. Not Marcus, necessarily. Marcus, I trusted. It was the way he said Dana and I have been talking before he said anything else. Like the conversation had already been decided somewhere else, and he was just delivering the conclusion. But I was lonely, and I missed my grandchildren. And 63-year-old men with bad knees and deteriorating spines are not always great at listening to their instincts when someone is offering them a warm room and a family dinner table. So I sold the house. $412,000. I put $200,000 into a savings account and told Marcus I wanted to contribute to the household. He said he wouldn't hear of it. Dana smiled in that particular way she had, a smile that reached her lips but not 1 inch further, and said, "Of course not. We're family." I moved in on a Saturday in late September, and for a few weeks, things were fine. Better than fine, actually. My granddaughters, Lily and Rose, 7 and 9, would climb onto my lap after school and make me tell them stories about the road. Marcus grilled on weekends. We watched football together. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I belonged somewhere. But Dana had a way of making you feel her displeasure without ever saying a direct word. She would sigh when she walked past the den if I was watching television. She would answer my questions with single syllables. She would make coffee in the morning and not mention she had made it. So by the time I came downstairs, the pot was cold. Small things. The kind of things you can't complain about without sounding petty or paranoid. The kind of things designed, I came to believe, to make you feel like a guest who has overstayed his welcome. By October, Marcus had started working longer hours, or so he said. He was distant at dinner, distracted on weekends, and Dana, who had been quietly cold, began to be openly impatient. It came to a head on a Thursday night in November. I had offered to pick up the girls from school because Dana had a headache, or said she did. When I brought them home, Lily had scraped her knee on the playground and was crying, and I had let her track a little mud across the entryway in the rush to get her cleaned up. Dana came downstairs, took one look at the floor, and something behind her eyes went hard as concrete. Marcus came home an hour later to a house that felt like a pressure cooker. I was sitting in the kitchen. I could hear their voices from behind the closed bedroom door. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Burden. His house? Not permanent. Mistake. When Marcus came into the kitchen, he wouldn't look at me directly. He sat down across the table and put his hands flat on the surface, the way people do when they're trying to hold themselves steady. "Dad," he started. "I already know," I said. He looked up then. His eyes were tired and guilty, and somewhere behind the guilt, I thought I saw relief, which was the worst part of all. He explained it the way you explain things when you've been told what to say by someone else. It wasn't working out. The house felt crowded. The girls' schedules were complicated. Dana had her own way of running the household, and it was hard with another adult in the space. He said it all in the voice of a man reading from a script he didn't entirely believe in, but didn't have the courage to put down. "And my $200,000? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Dana put it into the renovation account for the addition we're planning on the back of the house. We figured, since you were going to be living here long term." I sat with that for a long moment. Long enough to understand exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a senior living community 40 miles from there. He had circled a one-bedroom unit in red pen. It was $900 a month. "We'll help with the cost until you get settled," he said. I looked at that piece of paper. I thought about Carol's kitchen, where I used to stand in the morning watching the sun come up over the backyard. I thought about the savings account that was now, apparently, a renovation fund. I thought about 35 years of highways and loading docks and sleeping upright in a truck cab so that my son could go to college, could have a wedding, could have a house worth renovating. I didn't raise my voice. I was surprised by how calm I felt, actually. It was the calm of someone who has had everything solid taken out from under them and realizes they are still, somehow, standing. I went upstairs and packed a single bag. I didn't take much: a change of clothes, my medications, the photograph of Carol that I kept on the nightstand, my wallet, which had $62 in it because I had not yet set up a new bank account since the sale. Marcus drove me to the Greyhound station in Millfield. It was 11 o'clock at night, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s. He pulled up to the curb and kept the engine running. "I can come back for more of your things," he said. "Whenever you're ready." I got out of the car without saying anything. I heard him pull away before I even reached the door. The station was almost empty. A few plastic chairs bolted to the wall. A vending machine with one of the fluorescent tubes flickering. A teenager asleep across 2 seats with a backpack under her head. A woman at the ticket counter who was reading something on her phone and did not look up when I walked in. I bought a cup of coffee from the machine because I needed something warm to hold on to. Then I went back outside, because the fluorescent flickering was making my head ache, and I sat down on a wooden bench near the entrance. I have been alone in a lot of places over the years. Truck stops at 3 in the morning, hospital waiting rooms, the pew at Carol's funeral with the whole empty row beside me. But sitting on that bench in the dark, in the cold, with $62 and a bag I could carry in one hand, I felt a kind of loneliness I did not have a name for. I did not cry. I had done my crying in Carol's kitchen when the house sold. I had done my crying in the spare room when I heard the word burden through a closed door. What I felt now was something quieter and more frightening than grief. It was the particular vertigo of a man who has spent his whole life being useful and suddenly has nothing to be useful for. Then I heard a voice to my left, steady, unhurried, with a slight rasp to it that sounded like a man who had once been accustomed to speaking in large rooms. "Cold night to be sitting outside." I turned. I had not noticed him when I sat down. He was an older man, perhaps mid-70s, in a charcoal overcoat that fit him well. A folded white cane rested across his knees. His eyes were directed somewhere past my shoulder, the fixed, unfocused gaze of someone who cannot see. "I suppose it is," I said. "You sound like a man with a weight on him." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I settled for, "Been a long night." He nodded slowly. He had the kind of face that suggested he had spent a long time learning how to listen. The lines around his mouth were from something more deliberate than smiling or frowning. They looked like the lines of someone who had paid close attention to things for a very long time. "I heard you get dropped off," he said. "Whoever brought you, they didn't stay." "No," I said. "They didn't." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Then he said, "I don't usually do this, but I was sitting here thinking about my son tonight, and sometimes when I think about him, I feel like I need to do something useful in the world to counterbalance the weight of missing him." He turned his face slightly toward me, though he could not see me. "My name is Edward. Edward Marsh." The name hit me like a hand slapping flat against a table. Edward Marsh. I knew that name. Anyone who had lived in this part of Tennessee for more than 5 years knew that name. Marsh Medical Holdings. 4 regional hospitals. A foundation that had funded a children's oncology wing and 2 rural health clinics. The kind of wealth that didn't show off because it didn't need to. The kind of name that showed up on the sides of buildings and at the bottom of charity galas and nowhere else. I am not a man who is easily made speechless. But I sat there for a moment, genuinely unable to form a sentence. "You're not serious," I finally said. He smiled at that. I get that reaction occasionally. He tilted his head slightly. "And you are?" "James," I said. "James Calloway." "James." He seemed to try the name out, the way you try on something to see if it fits. "What brings you to a bus station at midnight, James?" "I'm not entirely sure where I'm going yet," I said honestly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I lost my sight 4 years ago. Macular degeneration. By the time we caught how fast it was progressing, there wasn't much to be done." He said it without self-pity, the way you state a fact about weather. "I was a surgeon for 38 years, a vascular surgeon, and now I cannot read a page or recognize a face." He paused. "I tell you that not for sympathy, but because I want you to understand that I know what it feels like to have the life you built suddenly not resemble itself anymore." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "My driver is picking me up in about 15 minutes, he continued. "I was in town for a board meeting and I wanted some air afterward, which my staff considers a personal failing of mine." He almost smiled. "I have a proposition for you, James, and I want you to hear it out before you respond." I waited. "I'd like you to ride with me tonight. Not to a bus station, not to a senior living complex." He said the last phrase with a gentle precision that told me he had heard more of my conversation with Marcus through the car window than I had realized. "I'd like you to come to my home. Stay a few days. And let me explain to you why I think this particular night might be the beginning of something rather than the end of something." I stared at him. "Mr. Marsh," I said, "I appreciate the kindness, but I don't know you, and you don't know me." "That's true," he said. "But I knew your wife." The world went very quiet. "Carol," he said. "Carol Calloway, née Whitfield. She volunteered at Mercy General for 6 years. I was chief of vascular surgery there from 1998 to 2014. Your wife spent every Tuesday morning in the pediatric ward reading to children who were afraid." He paused. "She was one of the finest people I have ever known, and she talked about you constantly. The truck driver husband who called every night from the road just to hear her voice." I had to look away. I looked out at the parking lot, at the orange glow of the vapor lights, at nothing in particular. "She never mentioned you," I said. My voice was not entirely steady. She wouldn't have. Carol was not the kind of woman who name-dropped. He folded his hands over the cane. "I went to her memorial service. I stood in the back. You wouldn't have noticed me. You had your boy on one side and your granddaughters on the other, and you were holding yourself together with everything you had." He paused. I thought about introducing myself. I decided it wasn't the time. He paused again. "I think perhaps this is the time." A black Lincoln Town car pulled into the lot at that moment, moving slowly, headlights sweeping across the bench where we sat. It stopped at the curb, and a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered in a dark jacket, got out. "Mr. Marsh, sorry for the wait. The board meeting ran long." He looked at me with brief, careful assessment. "No trouble," Edward said. "Thomas, this is James Calloway. He'll be joining us tonight. Thomas looked at me again, measured and professional, then nodded once. Of course. Can I take your bag, Mr. Calloway? I looked at that Lincoln. I looked at Edward Marsh sitting on that bench in his overcoat. I thought about Marcus's car pulling away from the curb with the engine still warm. I thought about $62 and a vending machine coffee and a senior living brochure with a unit circled in red. I picked up my bag and I said, "Yes, thank you." The drive to Edward's property took nearly an hour. He had an estate outside of town, set back from the road behind a long gravel drive lined with old oak trees that arched overhead like a cathedral. The house itself was Georgian, 3 stories, red brick and white trim, lit from the outside so it glowed against the dark tree line. There was a fountain in the circular drive that had been shut off for winter, and a porch wide enough to hold a dining table. I hadn't grown up poor, but I hadn't grown up anywhere near this. Thomas opened the car door, and Edward took his arm with the ease of long practice. A woman appeared at the front door, 60 or so, with a brisk, efficient manner and reading glasses pushed up on her head. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "and this must be your guest. I'm Helen, the housekeeper. Your room is ready on the 2nd floor, Mr. Calloway. I'll have something warm sent up." We went inside. The entryway was paneled in dark wood with a black and white tile floor, and there was a staircase that curved upward to the left in a wide sweep. It smelled like old books and lemon oil and something cooking somewhere deeper in the house. Edward insisted we sit in the study before I went upstairs. It was a large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and 2 leather chairs angled toward a fireplace that Helen had apparently been asked to prepare because a small fire was burning when we walked in. He told me about himself as the fire worked down to embers. His wife, Margaret, had died 11 years ago. A stroke, swift and without warning. His son, Daniel, had died in Afghanistan in 2009. He had been 24 years old. Edward's voice, when he said this, did not break. It had the sound of a grief so thoroughly lived with that it had become architectural, load-bearing, holding up everything else. "Since then," he said, "I have had colleagues. I have had staff who are loyal and genuinely kind. I have had a foundation to run and institutions to oversee." He turned his face toward the fire, though he could not see the flames. "What I have not had is someone to eat dinner with who isn't on my payroll." He almost laughed at that. "My daughter-in-law moved away after Daniel died, remarried, had children. She sends Christmas cards." He paused. "I don't blame her for building a new life. I blame myself for not building one." I sat with that for a while. Then I said, "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because Carol trusted you completely, and I trusted Carol's judgment more than I have trusted most people in my professional life. Because your son dropped you at a bus station at midnight with $60 and a change of clothes, which tells me you are the kind of man who gives without keeping score, since only that kind of man ends up that profoundly taken advantage of. And because," he said, and there was something careful in his voice now, "I think you might be the kind of man who could help me run something." I blinked. "Run what?" "The Marsh Foundation." He leaned forward slightly. "I have been looking for a director of community outreach for 8 months. Someone who understands working people. Someone who knows what it feels like to need help and not know how to ask for it." He paused. "I'm not offering you charity, James. I'm offering you a job, a real one, with a salary commensurate to the responsibility." He named a number. I sat very still. The number he named was more than I had earned in the best year of my trucking career. "You don't know if I'm capable of that," I said. "I know you drove a truck for 35 years without a serious accident or a late delivery record. I know you sold your home and handed the money to your son because you believed in family. I know Carol called you a man of uncommon steadiness." He folded his hands. "I'd rather have uncommon steadiness than a polished resume." That night, I lay in a guest room that was larger than the apartment I'd had before I met Carol, and I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how a single phone call from my son 3 months ago had led to this room, this ceiling, this impossible circumstance. I did not sleep much. But what sleep I got was the first genuinely peaceful sleep I'd had in years. The next morning, Marcus called while I was having breakfast with Edward in the formal dining room, sunlight coming through the tall windows, Helen pouring coffee. Dad. His voice sounded tight. Dana told me she saw your location last night on the family app, before you turned it off. She said you were on the Marsh property. Edward Marsh. Is that true? I put down my coffee cup. Yes, I said. There was a pause that stretched long enough to contain a great many things. How do you know Edward Marsh? I met him last night at the bus station. You know, the one where you left me. Another pause. Dad, what are you doing out there? Having breakfast, I said. You? He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, almost cautiously, the way you approach something you're not sure is stable. Is he offering you something? Some kind of arrangement? I thought of Edward's number. I thought of a brochure with a one-bedroom unit circled in red pen. I'm not sure that's your business anymore, Marcus, I said. You made that pretty clear last night. I hung up before he could respond. Edward, who had heard the whole thing from across the table, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, he'll call back. He did. 4 times before noon. I spent that day with Edward, walking the grounds in the thin winter sunlight while he held my arm and told me about the Foundation's work. 3 rural health clinics serving counties with no hospital within 40 miles. A mobile mammography program. A prescription assistance fund for uninsured workers. The kind of work that happened quietly, without press releases. Because Edward had never had much interest in credit. By the time we came back inside, something had settled in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose. Not the borrowed purpose of being someone's father or someone's tenant, but something that was mine. I called Thomas that evening and asked him to drive me to get the rest of my things from Marcus's house. Dana met me at the door. She looked at Thomas's town car in the driveway with an expression that she was not quite skilled enough to hide. Then she looked at me, and something shifted in her face. Something calculating. James, she said, in a tone she had never used with me in all the months I had lived under her roof. Please come in. Marcus is almost home. We'd love to talk. I collected my things, which took 20 minutes. A box of clothes, the rest of Carol's photographs, a small toolbox that had been my father's. When I came back downstairs, Dana was in the kitchen making coffee she had not made for me in weeks. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said carefully. Marcus was under a lot of stress. We both were. We weren't asking you to leave permanently. Just to maybe consider a different arrangement temporarily. I looked at her. I thought about the word burden spoken through a bedroom door. Dana, I said, I'd like my $200,000 returned within 30 days. My attorney will be in touch. She went very still. Your attorney? I picked up my box. Thomas was waiting by the car. Have a good evening, I said. Marcus called again that night. His voice had lost the guilty, careful quality it had the night before. Now it had an edge I recognized from the few real arguments we had ever had. Dad, I don't know what Marsh is telling you or what he's promised you, but you need to be careful. Men like that don't just take in strangers out of kindness. There's always something they want. I let him talk. And whatever you think about the $200,000, that money went into a joint renovation account. There are legal documents. If you try to claim it's yours alone, it's going to get messy. I thanked him for the call. Then I hung up and asked Edward's lawyer, a sharp, precise woman named Renee Ballard, to send Marcus a formal letter of demand the following morning. What happened next arrived faster than I expected, because Dana was smarter than Marcus, and she had been planning things for longer than I knew. Within 2 weeks of my moving into Edward's guest room, which had begun to feel less like a guest room and more like a room, Dana had retained a lawyer. The claim was that the $200,000 was a gift freely given for the purpose of a family home improvement, and that I had subsequently abandoned the family residence voluntarily. She had a signed document, which Marcus had had me sign the week I moved in, under the impression that it was a standard household agreement. I had signed a lot of documents in my trucking years. I had not always read them as carefully as I should have. Renee looked at it and told me it was real but challengeable. Dana's attorney was good, she said, but not as good as she thought. Then Marcus's younger sister from his mother's first marriage, a woman named Patrice, who I had met perhaps 4 times in my life, and who had never expressed much interest in my existence, appeared. She called me from a number I didn't recognize. "James, I just want you to know I'm on your side in all this," she said warmly. "Family needs to stick together. And honestly, what Marcus and Dana did was wrong." She paused. "I've been talking to Dana, actually. I think there might be a way to settle this quietly if you were willing to split the amount. Share it with the people who made the home possible. Everyone walks away clean." "I see," I said. "I just think it's the fair thing. Dana and Marcus put real work into that house. And you're doing so well now, James. From what I hear, you're not exactly hurting." I told her I would think about it. Then I called Renee and told her everything Patrice had said. Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what a recorded phone call is worth in a civil proceeding?" I said I was starting to have a clearer picture. What followed was something I can only describe as an education. I had spent 35 years learning roads. I now spent 3 months learning courtrooms, or at least learning how Renee navigated them on my behalf. Dana filed a formal civil claim for the $200,000. She submitted a declaration from Patrice, who swore that I had expressed on multiple occasions that the money was a gift with no expectation of return. She submitted photographs of the renovation plans to demonstrate reliance on the funds. She submitted a statement from a neighbor who claimed I had told him I was happy to contribute to the house as a permanent resident. Each piece was carefully constructed. Each piece was at least partially false. And each piece, Renee told me, could be answered. Because Edward Marsh's home, like Edward Marsh himself, ran on careful preparation. There were security cameras at every entrance to the property. There were recordings of Dana's single visit to the house, during which she had arrived unannounced with a casserole dish and a smile she put on in the driveway, and during which she had spent 25 minutes trying to extract information about Edward's estate planning. There was a recording of Patrice's follow-up visit, in which she had arrived with a bottle of wine and asked Helen how many bedrooms the house had. There was also, I learned, a recording of the phone call in which Patrice suggested I split the money in exchange for her silence. I didn't know about the cameras. I told Edward one morning over breakfast. He smiled. Helen is extremely thorough. But the piece that mattered most was something Renee had found on her own. The document Dana had me sign was not what it appeared to be. It contained language about shared household contributions. What it did not contain, what Dana's attorney appeared to have failed to notice it did not contain, was any clause specifying the money as a non-returnable gift. It was, Renee argued, a loan agreement with an implied repayment schedule tied to my residency, and I had left the residence involuntarily, under duress, as evidenced by the time and circumstances of the departure, 11 o'clock at night with a single bag. She had texts from Marcus, not the texts he had sent me, but the texts Dana had sent him in the weeks before that night, which she had not thought to delete before the phone was subpoenaed. In those texts, Dana had mapped out the plan with a precision that impressed even Renee in a grim, professional way. Timing, language to use, the document, the renovation account, every piece of it. The preliminary hearing was held on a Tuesday in February. Dana sat at the plaintiff's table in a composed, muted outfit with an expression carefully arranged to suggest she was the reasonable party in an unfortunate dispute. Marcus sat beside her and did not look at me once. Renee stood and presented the evidence methodically. The texts, the security footage, the phone recording of Patrice's offer, the structural analysis of the document Dana had called a gift agreement, the timeline of the departure from the residence, including the GPS record from Marcus's car showing the drop-off at the bus station at 11:14 p.m. Dana's attorney objected to several things. The judge sustained very few of them. When the footage of Dana's visit to Edward's estate played on the screen in the courtroom, Dana's composure finally cracked. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes and a slight forward lean that told Renee everything she needed. The judge did not rule from the bench that day, but when he did rule, 10 days later, it was clear and final. The $200,000 was to be returned in full within 60 days. Legal costs were awarded to me. Dana's claim of voluntary gifting was dismissed. Patrice's sworn declaration was referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury. Marcus called me the night after the ruling. He didn't say anything at first. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, I didn't know about the texts, about what she had planned. I need you to know that. I sat in Edward's study with the phone against my ear and thought about that for a moment. Marcus, I said, I believe you didn't plan it. I don't believe you didn't see it happening. He didn't deny that. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, and his voice, for the first time in months, sounded like him, like the boy who used to wait up past his bedtime to hear the truck in the driveway. I know you are, I said, and I'm not going to tell you that fixes everything tonight, but I'm not going to tell you it can't be fixed, either. After I hung up, I sat in the study for a long time. Edward came in at some point and settled into the chair across from me without asking what was wrong, which was one of his particular gifts. He's going to make a full break from Dana? He asked. I think so. Eventually. Edward nodded. And when he does, what are you going to do? I thought about what the right kind of man would do. The kind of man Carol would have recognized. Give him a chance to earn it back, I said. Edward smiled. Good. He leaned back in his chair. James, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. About the night we met at that bus station. I looked at him. Helen's sister works the ticket counter at the Millfield Greyhound. She called Helen that night because she was worried about an older gentleman sitting outside alone in the cold. Helen came to get me. He paused. I asked Thomas to drive me there specifically. I stared at him. You knew? Not everything. I knew there was a man at the station who had been dropped off late at night with very little. Helen's sister said he looked like someone whose legs had been kicked out from under him. Edward folded his hands over his cane. I had been sitting in this house for weeks, thinking about Daniel, about Margaret, about all the empty chairs, at all the tables. I told Thomas, if this man is who Helen says he is, bring me to him. And if he's not, we'll have done a small kindness on a cold night and come home. He tilted his head slightly. Carol told me once, years ago, that her husband had a quality she had only ever seen in a handful of people. She said, you never made people feel small. Not road workers, not waitresses, not the overnight dispatcher at the depot. Never. She said it was the thing she loved best about you. He paused. I thought a man like that deserved a better ending to that night than a bus station bench. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and held them there. After a while, I said, she never told me she knew you. She knew a great many good people quietly. He smiled. It was her particular style. That was 14 months ago. I am now the Director of Community Outreach for the Marsh Foundation. I have put 200 rural families in contact with prescription assistance programs they didn't know existed. I have helped open a mobile health clinic in a county where the nearest emergency room is 47 miles away. I have sat across the table from people in their 50s and 60s who worked their whole lives and fell through the cracks, and I have tried to be the kind of person who helps them find the door they couldn't see. I have dinner with Edward every night. We disagree about baseball and agree about most everything else. He has introduced me to more people in 14 months than I met in 14 years on the road, and every one of them calls me James, not the old trucker, not the retired nobody. Just James. Marcus and I speak every week now. He and Dana separated 8 months ago. He's renting an apartment 20 minutes from the girls, and he drives them to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He called me on my birthday for the first time in 6 years. We are not where we were. Not yet. But we are building something, slowly and honestly, the way you build things that are meant to last. Patrice was charged with providing false testimony in a civil proceeding. She accepted a plea agreement. We haven't spoken since, and I don't expect that will change. A few weeks ago, I was at the Millfield bus station. I had gone to pick something up for Helen from the shipping counter there, a completely ordinary errand on a Wednesday afternoon. I was walking through the waiting area when I saw a man sitting alone near the door. He was in his mid-60s, maybe, with a duffel bag on the floor by his feet and the unmistakable look of someone who does not know what comes next. Not afraid, exactly, just hollowed out. I stopped. I sat down in the chair next to him and said, "Cold day to be waiting alone." He looked at me sideways, surprised. "Yeah," he said, "it is." I asked if he needed anything. He said he was fine, which is what people say when they are not fine but haven't decided to trust you yet. I told him I had been sitting in that exact spot about a year ago with $62 and no idea what I was going to do next. He looked at me differently then. We talked for 20 minutes. I gave him the number of a housing assistance coordinator I know and the direct line to a job placement program the foundation runs for workers over 55. He wrote the numbers down on the back of a receipt from his wallet. I told him to call the next morning before 9 and ask for Sarah, and to tell her James sent him. He thanked me. I told him it was nothing, which was not entirely true, but it was also not the kind of thing you need to make a speech about. Walking back to Thomas's car in the cold afternoon light, I thought about Carol. I thought about 35 years of highways and the particular quality of light just before dawn, when you've been driving all night, and you crest a hill and there, all at once, is the country spreading out ahead of you. I thought about how many times I had called her from a truck stop at 2 in the morning just to hear her voice tell me she was glad I was out there doing what I did. I thought about a man in a charcoal overcoat sitting on a bench in the dark, turning his face toward the sound of someone else's pain because he had decided that the best thing to do with his grief was something useful. I thought about how the worst night of my life had been, in the final accounting, the night I found my way back to something I had almost stopped believing in. Not luck, not fate exactly, though maybe fate had a hand in it. Something more like this. The idea that the people who are worth knowing have a way of finding each other, even in parking lots, even at midnight, even when everything has gone as wrong as it can go. My name is James Calloway. I am 63 years old. I have bad knees and a back that knows every mile it's ever traveled. And I have not been lonely since November.